There is a specific thing that happens in the brain when someone spends sustained time doing work that carries no personal meaning for them. It is not burnout. Not exactly. It is not laziness. It is not depression, though it can look like all three from the outside, and sometimes from the inside too. It has a biological basis, a documented mechanism, and this is the part worth staying for. It has nothing to do with who you are as a person. What this video is going to do is give you the most accurate explanation available for what has been happening to your motivation, your focus, and your capacity to care about work you are still showing up to do. Not to motivate you. Not to tell you what to do next. To replace the explanation you have probably been using, the one that puts the problem inside your character, with the one that actually fits the evidence. Because the explanation you use determines what you try next. And most people in this position have been trying the wrong things because they started from the wrong explanation. Start with what is actually happening. The symptoms, named precisely, not the broad strokes, the specific texture of it. There is the motivation erosion, the experience of knowing intellectually that something needs to get done and being completely unable to generate any internal momentum toward doing it. Not procrastination in the conventional sense. Procrastination implies avoidance of something difficult. This is different. This is the absence of ignition on something that used to be at least manageable, sometimes even engaging. There is the focus fragmentation, the inability to hold attention on work that once held it without effort, the tab switching, the rereading of the same paragraph, the meeting where someone is talking and you are performing the expression of listening. Research on cognitive engagement consistently shows that when work lacks personal relevance, the brain's attention systems don't simply underperform. They actively resist sustained focus. This is not a willpower failure. It is the brain allocating resources in accordance with what it registers as mattering. There is the emotional flattening, the disappearance of both the highs and the lows. Projects that would once have produced some real satisfaction on completion now produce nothing. The deadline passes. The deliverable is submitted. And there is just the next thing on the list. This one tends to frighten people more than the others, because the absence of feeling reads, to the person experiencing it, as evidence of something deeply wrong with them, as though the capacity for engagement has simply switched off. Here is what that flatness actually is. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of a very specific signal, delivered so consistently for so long that it has become indistinguishable from numbness. The brain is not broken, it is reporting. And then there is the one nobody talks about directly, the creative contraction. The shrinking of the field of possibility inside the work. The experience of ideas that used to come somewhat naturally now requiring enormous effort to produce, and often not being worth the effort when they arrive. This matters more than it sounds. Because for many people in this position, the capacity to think expansively about their work was the last remaining source of internal satisfaction. When that contracts, the final thread connecting them to the work is gone. Now the mechanism. Not the soft version, the actual one. The brain's motivational system runs on a reward prediction circuit. When you do something and it produces an outcome that matters to you, that carries personal relevance, that connects to something you value, the brain releases dopamine, not as a reward for completing the task, as a signal that this class of activity is worth pursuing again. This is the system that creates what people loosely call motivation. It is not willpower. It is not discipline. It is a biological feedback loop that runs on meaning. Here is what happens when the work carries no personal meaning. The loop still runs. You complete tasks. Outcomes are produced. But the signal that comes back is not, "This is worth pursuing." It is closer to neutral. Occasionally, slightly negative. Over time, and this is the part the research is consistent on, the system recalibrates. The brain, which is an extraordinarily efficient resource allocation machine, begins to reduce the dopamine output associated with this class of activity, not because something is wrong with the brain, because the brain is doing exactly what it is designed to do. Stop investing heavily in activities that consistently fail to return meaning. This recalibration is what motivation erosion actually is. It is not laziness. It is the brain correctly concluding, based on a sustained body of evidence, that this work does not warrant full engagement, and adjusting its resource allocation accordingly. The focus fragmentation follows directly from this. When the brain's reward system is not engaged by a task, the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with mind-wandering, self-referential thinking, and internal narrative, becomes more active. This is why, during work that carries no meaning, the mind goes somewhere else. Not because of poor discipline, because the brain's attention architecture has a competitor for its resources, and the work is losing. The emotional flattening is the third layer of the same mechanism. Sustained low-signal input gradually dampens the emotional responsiveness of the system as a whole. Not just to work, across the board. The flatness that reads as numbness is actually the brain conserving affective resources in an environment that has consistently failed to warrant their full expenditure. So, the motivation erosion, the focus fragmentation, the creative contraction, the emotional flatness. These are not signs of a person falling apart. They are signs of a brain doing its job, allocating resources away from an environment that has consistently failed to return meaning, and doing it so efficiently that the person experiencing it can no longer tell the difference between the brain's signal and a permanent condition. Gallup has tracked this pattern across decades and hundreds of thousands of workers. The numbers are not subtle. The majority of people in established careers report being disengaged from their work, not occasionally, but as their baseline state. That is not a collection of individual failures. That is a documented systemic phenomenon, and it has a documented systemic cause. Here is the part that matters most. Given everything just described, the biology, the mechanism, the brain's entirely rational response to sustained meaninglessness, there is a question worth sitting with. Why, when someone is experiencing all of this, is the explanation they most commonly reach for not biological? Why is the first conclusion almost always, something is wrong with me? The answer is uncomfortable, but it is important. Because the moral explanation is more available. From early in life, the framework most people are given for motivation is a character framework. You work hard because you are disciplined. You succeed because you are committed. You fall short because you are lazy, distracted, insufficiently driven. This framework is so deeply embedded that when the motivational system begins to fail, the first and often only interpretation available is, I am failing it. Not, it is failing me. Not, it is correctly reporting a mismatch between what this environment offers and what I am constitutionally wired to need in order to sustain engagement. Just, the problem is me. And here is why that explanation is so dangerous. Not emotionally, though it is that too. It is dangerous because it prescribes the wrong intervention. If the problem is character, the solution is effort. Try harder, want it more. Develop the discipline you apparently lack, and so the person tries harder. Builds more elaborate productivity systems. Reads about motivation. Attempts to manufacture enthusiasm through sheer force of will. And when that doesn't work, when the brain's dopamine system continues its accurate, rational, entirely predictable refusal to engage with work that carries no meaning for it, the moral explanation tightens. I tried harder, and I still can't sustain it. Which means the deficiency runs deeper than I thought. This is the loop. This is what keeps analytically intelligent people in careers that are biologically incompatible with their sustained engagement, not because they are unwilling to leave, but because they have been prosecuting themselves with the wrong evidence for so long that leaving feels like admitting to the very character flaw they fear they have. The biological explanation does not make this easy. It does not hand you a clean exit or a guaranteed outcome, but it does do one thing that the moral explanation is constitutionally unable to do. It accurately identifies what is actually happening. Your brain is not failing you. It is doing exactly what a brain does when it is placed for extended periods in an environment that does not return meaning. It is recalibrating. It is conserving. It is reporting a mismatch. Clearly, consistently, through every symptom that has been making you question your own character. Not broken, misaligned. Those are not the same thing. And living on one side of that distinction versus the other is a genuinely different experience. Understanding the mechanism is the first honest step. The second step is knowing which specific pattern of misalignment is yours, because the 5 most common ones have different causes and different exits, and what moves one tends not to move the others. There is a short diagnostic in the description. A 10-minute audit that identifies exactly which pattern applies to your situation and what the most useful first direction looks like from there. It does not prescribe a leap. It prescribes a starting point. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. So what actually interrupts this? Not in the motivational sense. In the biological sense, what does the brain's reward prediction system actually respond to when the work itself has stopped producing the signal? The answer is not find meaningful work immediately. That is the destination, not the interruption. The answer, the one that is honest about how brains actually work, is this. The system responds to accurate attribution before it responds to changed circumstances. This is not intuitive, so it is worth saying carefully. When the brain understands, not emotionally, but cognitively, with actual accuracy, that the low signal state is a response to an environmental mismatch and not evidence of a constitutional deficiency, the self-prosecution loop loses some of its grip. Not all of it, some of it. And that partial loosening matters because the self-prosecution loop is itself a dopamine drain. The constant internal trial, the monitoring, the self-judgment, the effort of maintaining the case against yourself, consumes motivational resources that are not then available for anything else. When the loop loses grip, even partially, those resources begin to come back online. This is the mechanism of accurate attribution. It is not inspirational. It is neurological. The second interruption is small scope, meaning introduction, not a career change, not a purpose overhaul, something much more specific. Identifying, with genuine precision, not wishful thinking, one aspect of the current role or adjacent to it, where something approaching real engagement is still available. Not passion, engagement. The difference between those two words is the entire distance between useful and useless advice. Passion implies a sustained emotional state. Engagement is just. This particular thing holds my attention in a way that most of the rest of this does not. Research on what's called job crafting, the small-scale reshaping of how work is approached rather than what work is done, consistently shows that even modest increases in personally meaningful activity within a role produce measurable changes in engagement and motivational capacity, not because the work changed dramatically, because the brain received enough signal to sustain continued investment in the environment. This is not a solution, it is a bridge. It keeps the biological system functional enough to do the work of figuring out what comes next, without requiring that you have already figured out what comes next before the bridge becomes available. The third interruption, and the most important one, is directional clarity. Even provisional. The brain's reward prediction system does not require certainty. It requires signal. Even a tentative, imprecise working hypothesis about the direction of a different kind of work, one that is held loosely, without the pressure of commitment, produces enough forward-facing signal to begin counteracting the recalibration. This is why vague intention does not work, and specific curiosity does. And what a more meaningful career produces no neurological response. It is too abstract for the prediction system to model. I am curious whether the skills I use in this part of my work could apply differently in this direction. That is specific enough for the brain to begin running predictions on. And predictions, even tentative ones, generate signal. You already know enough to take the next step, not the leap. The next step. The distinction between those two is not semantic. It is biological. The leap requires certainty the brain cannot manufacture in this state. The next step only requires a direction specific enough to generate a prediction. That is available right now. Not after clarity. Now, if this opens something you want to go further with, the Career Clarity Audit in the description is built exactly for this moment. It identifies which of the 5 misalignment patterns is yours and where to direct the first honest step from there. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. When did you first notice the flatness, and what story did you tell yourself about what it meant? So here is what this video has actually been about. Not neuroscience for its own sake, but the specific thing the neuroscience makes possible. An accurate explanation. You arrived in some version with the explanation that has been running quietly in the background for however long this has been going on. Something in you is insufficient. The motivation that other people seem to have, you cannot sustain it. The engagement that used to be available has gone somewhere, and the most available interpretation of its absence is a character reading. That explanation is not just wrong, it is prescribing the wrong intervention. It is sending you back, again, to try harder at something your brain has accurately determined does not warrant full investment, and then using your failure to sustain that effort as further evidence of the deficiency it invented in the first place. The biological explanation does not make this comfortable. It does not make the decision easier, or the path clearer, or the financial reality more forgiving. What it does is this. It replaces the prosecution with a map. The prosecution says, you are the problem. Fix yourself and the situation will follow. The map says, you are in a specific situation with a specific mechanism and a specific set of exits. The situation is real. The mechanism is understood. The exits exist. Those are not the same document. Living by one versus the other produces genuinely different outcomes, not because of motivation, but because of what each one tells you to try next. You did not know, before this video, that what has been happening to your motivation has a biological name and a documented cause. You know that now. And the reason that matters is not that knowledge fixes this. It does not on its own. It matters because naming something accurately is always, without exception, the prerequisite for having a different relationship with it. You are more located than you were when you clicked. Not broken, misaligned. Carry that one.